The quiet moments are often the most unsettling. That soft creak you hear when no one else is home. The sudden draft when all the windows are closed. Tonight, we're exploring those slivers of unease that slip into our everyday lives. Those subtle shifts that make the familiar suddenly terrifying. We'll delve into the moments when security feels like a thin veil, easily torn, and the world just outside your door feels a little too close for comfort. So, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let the outside world fade away. For the next hour, your only company will be the stories we share. The small wooden box on the kitchen counter, where we always left the spare backdoor key, felt unusually light that Tuesday morning. My dad had this thing about keys. He always said if you lost one, you lost your peace of mind. I was 17, still in high school, and my parents both left for work by 7 a.m. My older brother, Mark, usually just overslept, but this morning he was already gone too, probably to an early practice for the swim team. It was just me, the quiet house, and the leftover toast. The only thing out of place was that lighter key box, but I just figured someone had used it for something and put it back carelessly. It didn't really register until I was locking up to head to school myself, around 7:45 a.m. I always double-checked the back door. It was an old house and the lock could be tricky. That's when I noticed the small, ornate iron key hanging on its hook by the door was missing. Not the spare in the box that was for emergencies, usually kept inside a safe, but the one we actually used every day to lock and unlock the back door. My mom was meticulous about hanging it up. She'd scold us if we left it anywhere else. I checked the hook, then the small shelf below it, even the floor. Nothing. I shrugged it off as best I could. Mark was notoriously forgetful. When I got home later that afternoon, the house was silent and still, just as I'd left it. The missing key was still nagging at me, a tiny mosquito buzzing in the back of my mind. I checked the back door again, this time more thoroughly. The lock was definitely engaged, and the deadbolt was thrown. So no one had just walked in, which was a small relief. I went through my usual after-school routine, dumped my backpack, grabbed a snack, and settled onto the couch with my phone. The quiet of the house, usually comforting, felt a little different today. A little too quiet, perhaps. I tried to shake it off, blaming it on my own overactive imagination. Around 5 p.m., just as the afternoon light started to fade, I heard it. A faint click, coming from upstairs. It was a distinctive sound, the kind you only hear when a door handle is slowly, carefully depressed. I froze, my phone clattering onto the cushion beside me. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. Both my parents were still at work, and Mark wasn't due home for another hour, maybe two. I listened, holding my breath, straining to hear anything else. The house settled into silence again. A heavy, oppressive quiet. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling, or the wind, but I knew what I'd heard. Slowly, cautiously, I pushed myself off the couch. Every muscle in my body felt tense. I debated calling my mom, but what would I even say? I think I heard a door click. It sounded ridiculous, even to me. Instead, I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find nearby, an old baseball bat from the umbrella stand by the front door. My hands were shaking as I crept towards the stairs. I heard it again, this time more distinct. A soft thud, like a foot hitting the carpeted hallway upstairs. Someone was definitely up there. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation, any explanation, but there was none that wasn't terrifying. I moved like a ghost, each step on the old floorboards agonizingly slow. The air upstairs felt colder, heavier. As I reached the landing, I could see down the long hallway. The door to my parents' bedroom, which was always kept slightly ajar, was now fully closed. My breath caught in my throat. I stood there, clutching the bat, my knuckles white, staring at that closed door. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. All I could do was stand there, watching that door, waiting for it to open, waiting for whatever was behind it to show itself. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Nothing happened. The silence returned, more terrifying now than any sound. Finally, I forced myself to move, taking small, shaky steps towards my parents' bedroom door. I raised the bat, ready to swing. With a sudden burst of courage born of pure terror, I threw the door open. The room was empty. The bed was made, the curtains drawn. Everything looked normal. Then I noticed the closet door, which was usually left slightly ajar, was tightly closed. And through the thin wood, I could see a sliver of light from under the door. Someone was in there. I could hear faint, shallow breathing. My heart was a frantic drum solo in my chest. I knew I couldn't confront whatever was in there. My only thought was escape. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the closet door, until I was out of the bedroom and halfway down the stairs. That's when I finally called 911, my voice a shaky whisper. The operator stayed on the line with me, telling me to get out of the house. I fumbled with the front door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. As I burst outside, I glanced back at the house, and that's when I saw it. Tucked just under the welcome mat, hidden from view until you were right on top of it, was the ornate iron key to our back door. The police arrived quickly, lights flashing, sirens off. They went in, and a few minutes later, 2 officers emerged, escorting a man in handcuffs. He was a stranger, older, with tired eyes. They found him hiding in my parents' closet, holding a small duffel bag. He didn't say anything, just looked down. They said he was probably casing the place, got spooked when I came home, and decided to hide. He must have used the key he found, or perhaps had been watching us long enough to know where it was hidden. They said it was lucky I came home when I did, or it could have been much worse. But the real chilling part wasn't that he was in our house. It was what they found in his bag, a small collection of our family photos, taken from our social media, printed out and neatly organized. He wasn't just a random burglar. He knew us. They said he'd been watching us for weeks, studying our routine, even figuring out where we kept our spare key. The house felt tainted after that, like a silent, invisible presence still lingered. We changed all the locks, installed a security system, but it didn't change the feeling. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer. Every creak of the house sounded like a footstep. I never felt safe in my own home again. Not truly. Knowing someone had been inside, watching, waiting, made every moment of solitude feel like a trap. And sometimes, even now, when I'm alone, I still check under the welcome mat. Sometimes, the things we take for granted, the small routines that make up our day, can become twisted and dark. A misplaced item, an unexpected change, they're just minor inconveniences, right? Until they aren't. Until they hint at something more, something watching, something waiting for an opening. The recycling bin was out on the curb, just like every Tuesday morning. But when I walked out to get the newspaper, I noticed our back screen door was ajar. Not just slightly open, but fully unlatched, swinging gently in the morning breeze. This wasn't a huge deal normally. My husband, Mark, often forgot to latch it properly after taking out the trash at night. He'd get distracted or tired and just pull it shut without making sure the mechanism clicked into place. We talked about it 100 times. Someone could just walk in, Mark, I'd say, half joking, half serious. He'd always laugh it off, saying no one would bother with our quiet street, especially not through the back. I went about my morning, made coffee, checked emails. The open screen door nagged at me, though. It was just a little too wide, considering how still the air was. Around 7:30 a.m., Mark came down for breakfast. "Hey, did you forget the back door again last night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He paused, stirring his coffee. No, I don't think so. I remember specifically double-checking it after I put the last bag out, because you always nag me about it. He smiled, but I didn't return it. He was usually so forgetful, but he sounded genuinely sure this time. My stomach gave a small lurch, but I pushed it down. It had to be Mark. Who else would it be? Later that morning, as I was tidying up the kitchen, I noticed something else odd. I had baked a batch of blueberry muffins the night before. There were 12 of them, cooling on the wire rack on the counter when I went to bed. Now, there were only 11. One was missing. I frowned. Mark definitely didn't eat one this morning. He had his usual oatmeal, and I hadn't touched them. I racked my brain. Had I perhaps miscounted last night? Or maybe Mark had snuck one in the middle of the night and just forgotten. He'd never do that without telling me, though. We always knew what was in the fridge, what was on the counter. We weren't a family that had mystery food disappearances. A chill ran through me as I looked at the floor by the back door. We had a small mat there, but right beside it, on the polished hardwood, I saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible smudge, like a faint shadow. It was definitely a footprint. We took our shoes off at the front door, always. Mark never wore shoes in the house, and neither did I. This print, barely visible, looked like it was from a sneaker, not a bare foot or a sock. It was angled away from the door, as if whoever made it had just stepped inside. My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't Mark. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had been in our house. I started checking the house, slowly, carefully. The kind of check you do when you don't really want to find anything. Every door, every window. Nothing was obviously broken or forced. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The beds were made, the bathrooms were clean, the living room tidy. There were no drawers pulled open, no valuables missing. It was as if someone had just walked through, just looked. But then I remembered the muffin, and the door, and the footprint. This wasn't just someone looking. Someone had been here, inside, in the quiet of the night, while we slept. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of the trees outside, sounded amplified. I kept seeing the image of the open screen door, the single missing muffin, the phantom footprint. Mark was snoring softly beside me, oblivious. I got up and walked through the house, checking all the locks again, even though I knew they were secure. I even checked the back screen door. It was latched, but as I stood there, in the dim hallway, I thought I heard something. A very faint whisper, just outside the house. It was gone as soon as I focused on it, probably just the wind. But it made the hairs on my arms stand up. The next morning, I was almost afraid to go into the kitchen, but I had to, and there it was again. Another muffin, gone. 2 now, from the same batch. And again, nothing else seemed out of place. No new footprints. The back screen door was still latched. This was beyond coincidence. Someone wasn't just walking through. Someone was coming in, taking something small, leaving no trace. It was a game, or a message. The deliberate, quiet invasion was far more terrifying than a smash and grab. It felt personal, targeted, and completely out of my control. I started feeling like I was living in a glass box. I told Mark everything then. He listened, his face slowly losing color as I recounted the details. He called the police, but they couldn't do much without any forced entry or significant theft. They said they'd drive by more often, but it wasn't enough. It didn't feel safe. A few days later, I was out in the garden, trying to distract myself. Our neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was watering his lawn. He waved and I waved back, but then he just kept staring. Not at me, but at our house. His gaze was fixed on our back door, a strange, knowing look on his face. He didn't smile. He just stared, then slowly turned and went inside. That night I had a nightmare. I was in the kitchen, and the back door was wide open. I saw Mr. Henderson standing on our patio, just outside, holding a single blueberry muffin. He wasn't smiling. He just raised the muffin to his lips and took a bite, his eyes locked on mine. I woke up in a cold sweat. It wasn't Mark forgetting the door. It wasn't a random prowler. It was him, our neighbor, coming into our home, taking small things, making us doubt ourselves, knowing we couldn't prove it. The police wouldn't believe it. He just wanted us to know he could be there, that he had been there. He still lives next door. And every time I see him, I wonder if he's still coming in. It's easy to dismiss a strange feeling, a gut instinct that something isn't quite right. We tell ourselves it's just imagination, the wind, a trick of the light. But what if those feelings are whispers of a deeper truth? What if some things are better seen only in the corner of your eye? The first thing I noticed when I pulled into my driveway that Tuesday evening was the mailbox. It wasn't just slightly ajar or leaning. It had been moved entirely, pushed back about 6 inches from its usual spot at the edge of the lawn. I remember specifically because the small rose bush I'd planted next to it last spring, which usually brushed against its side, now had a distinct gap. It was odd, but I figured maybe the mail truck had nudged it, or the kids down the street had been messing around. I lived alone in a quiet cul-de-sac in suburban Maryland, so anything truly out of place was rare. I just shrugged, parked my car, and went inside, not giving it much more thought than a fleeting moment of curiosity. I was 28 at the time, working as a junior architect, and my routine was pretty set. Get home, change, make dinner, watch some TV, then maybe read a book. That night, though, felt different. Not in any dramatic way, but the house felt quieter than usual. My house, a modest 2-story, always had a certain hum, the old refrigerator, the slight creak of the floorboards as it settled, the distant traffic on the main road. But that night it was just still. Even the crickets outside seemed muted. I found myself listening, though I couldn't tell you what I was listening for. It was just a general sense of unease, like the air itself was holding its breath. I attributed it to being tired from a long day at the office. As I walked into the kitchen to start dinner, I noticed something else. The small overhead light above the sink, which I always turned off before leaving for work, was on. It was a dim, yellow glow, barely illuminating the counter. My heart gave a little jump. I distinctly remembered flicking it off that morning, a habit I'd had for years. This wasn't a big deal, of course. Maybe I'd forgotten. It happens. But combined with the moved mailbox and the unnerving quiet, a tiny seed of apprehension began to sprout. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the light, the faint buzz of the fluorescent tube filling the silence. Then, I reached up and turned it off, telling myself I was being ridiculous. I started making pasta, trying to shake off the strange feeling. But then, as I was waiting for the water to boil, I caught a faint scent. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but definitely not mine. It was a sweet, slightly metallic smell, like old pennies and something floral. My perfume was a light citrus, and I hadn't used any air fresheners that day. It was distinctively foreign, lingering in the air. I walked around the kitchen, sniffing, trying to pinpoint it. It seemed strongest near the back door, which led out to my small deck. I checked the lock, which was engaged, and the deadbolt was thrown. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a neighbor's laundry, but it felt closer, more intimate than that. The next thing was the basement door. It was usually kept slightly ajar, just enough to let some air circulate. But when I passed it on my way to the living room, it was fully closed. Not latched, just closed. I remember pausing, my hand hovering over the doorknob. My basement was unfinished, mostly just storage, and a little creepy on its own. I hesitated, an irrational fear blooming in my chest. What if someone was down there? No, that was absurd. I pushed the thought away, telling myself the draft from the open windows might have pushed it shut. But I didn't open it. I just walked past, my eyes darting to it every few seconds, a chill starting to creep up my spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. I ate dinner quickly, my appetite dulled by the growing anxiety. I tried to focus on the TV, but my mind kept replaying the small oddities. The moved mailbox, the kitchen light, the strange scent, the closed basement door. Each one alone was nothing, but together, they painted a picture of something being not right. I decided to go to bed early, hoping sleep would reset my mind. As I got ready, I found myself doing something I hadn't done since I was a child. I looked under my bed. There was nothing there, just dust bunnies and forgotten socks. But the act itself, the primal instinct to check, told me how deeply unsettled I truly was. I locked my bedroom door, something I never did. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that there was a logical explanation for everything. But then, a new detail surfaced in my memory, one that chilled me to the bone. Earlier, when I'd come home and taken off my shoes by the front door, I'd left them side by side as always. But when I'd gone to change, only one shoe was there. I'd assumed I'd kicked the other one under the console table and hadn't bothered to look for it. Now, lying in the dark, I realized that wasn't like me. I was meticulous. I always placed them together. The image of that single shoe by the door, the other one missing, felt like a deliberate message. My heart was pounding now, a frantic drum against my ribs. Couldn't stay in bed. I had to know. I crept out of my room, tiptoeing down the hallway, every creak of the floorboards sounding deafening. I made my way to the front door, my hand trembling as I reached for the deadbolt. It was locked. I breathed a sigh of relief, a shaky exhale. Then I looked down. There, neatly placed on the small rug inside the door, was my missing shoe. It hadn't been kicked under the table. It had been moved. And right next to it, peeking out from under the edge of the rug, was a small, folded piece of paper. It looked like a sticky note. My fingers shook as I picked up the note. It was a bright yellow sticky note, the kind I used for grocery lists. In neat, precise handwriting, it simply read, "You missed a spot." My blood ran cold. I immediately knew what it meant. The kitchen light. I had turned it off, yes, but it must have been on when they were here. And the note implied they had been watching me, observing my routine, my habits, my oversights. They had been in my house, had walked through my rooms, had even tidied up by placing my shoe back. The thought that someone had been silently present, moving through my space, knowing I was about to return, was utterly terrifying. It wasn't about what they took, but what they left behind. I called the police, of course. They found no forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. They suggested perhaps a former friend or acquaintance with a key, but I knew that wasn't it. This felt colder, more calculated. I moved out of that house within the month. Even now, years later, I still can't shake the feeling of being watched, of someone knowing my routines, seeing my small mistakes. I check every lock multiple times, every light switch, every detail, because the most disturbing part wasn't the invasion itself, but the chilling realization that whoever it was didn't want to steal anything. They just wanted me to know they had been there, and that they knew me, and that "you missed a spot" still echoes in my mind every time I turn off a light. We build walls, lock doors, and create routines, believing these things keep us safe. We trust in the known. But sometimes, the greatest threats aren't the monsters lurking in the shadows, but the unsettling realization that the shadows themselves might be closer than you think, right there in the spaces you once considered secure. The coffee maker was on when I came downstairs, which was odd because I'd made sure to turn it off last night. My dad was away on a business trip, and my mom always slept later than me, so I knew it wasn't either of them. I figured I must have just forgotten, even though I was usually meticulous about things like that. It was an old Mr. Coffee model with a clunky analog switch, hard to miss. The house felt colder than usual, too. A distinct chill in the air that wasn't quite right for a late spring morning in our quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. I shivered, rubbing my arms, and poured myself a cup, trying to shake off the strange feeling that lingered. Later that day, when I went to put the clean dishes away, I noticed a couple of our mugs were missing from the cupboard. We had a set of 4 identical blue ceramic mugs, and only 2 were there. My mom used one for her tea every morning, but the other 3 were usually stacked neatly. I asked her about it when she got home from work, thinking maybe she'd put them somewhere else, or perhaps she'd had a friend over. She just looked at me blankly and said, "No, honey, I haven't used any mugs besides mine this morning, and I certainly haven't had anyone over." We just shrugged it off, attributing it to one of those small, forgettable mysteries of everyday life. Maybe they were in the dishwasher or I'd overlooked them. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. I'm a light sleeper, and a faint sound had pulled me from a deep sleep. It wasn't a creak or a bang, more like a murmur, a low, indistinct whisper that seemed to drift up from downstairs. My heart started to pound a little, but then I told myself it was probably just the house settling, or the wind outside. Our old house made all sorts of noises at night. I lay there for a long time, straining my ears, but the sound didn't repeat. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd imagined it, just a residual dream echoing in the quiet dark. I closed my eyes, trying to force myself back to sleep, the silence now feeling heavier than before. The next morning, another small thing. A framed photo on the mantelpiece in the living room, a picture of my family at the beach, had been turned slightly askew. It was almost imperceptible, just a few degrees off-center. I knew it hadn't been like that when I left for school the day before, because I'd dusted the mantel and straightened everything. I nudged it back into place, a prickle of unease starting to spread. My mom was already out, and I decided not to mention it. Felt too trivial, too easy to dismiss. But cumulatively, these tiny discrepancies were starting to feel less like accidents and more like something else, something I couldn't quite name. That evening, while I was home alone, the air conditioner kicked on with a loud clunk, making me jump. The house was quiet again after that, almost too quiet. I was reading in my room, trying to focus, when I distinctly heard a single soft footstep on the floorboards directly below my room. Our house had old wooden floors that groaned under any weight. This wasn't a settling sound. It was too deliberate, too heavy. My blood ran cold. I froze, my book forgotten, listening intently. There was nothing else. No other steps, no rustling, just a profound, oppressive silence. I tried to tell myself it was just the house, or my imagination running wild, but the rationalizations were wearing thin. I slowly got out of bed, my heart thumping against my ribs. I crept to my bedroom door, opened it just a crack, and peered out into the dim hallway. No lights were on downstairs. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay put, to lock my door, but a terrible curiosity, a need to confirm or deny what I'd heard, pulled me forward. I tiptoed to the top of the stairs, straining my ears, hearing nothing but the frantic beat of my own heart. The silence from downstairs was absolute. It wasn't the usual comfortable quiet of an empty house. It was a dead, waiting silence that felt profoundly wrong, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I decided to turn on a light just to break the spell. But when I reached the light switch at the top of the stairs, I hesitated. What if turning on a light confirmed my fears, revealing something I didn't want to see? I crept down a few steps, my eyes scanning the dark living room below. That's when I noticed it. The faint glow of the small nightlight we kept plugged into the outlet in the downstairs guest bathroom. It was on. Shouldn't have been. We only used that nightlight when guests were staying over, and it was always unplugged otherwise. A new wave of icy dread washed over me, replacing the fear with a sickening certainty that I was not alone. I backed away from the stairs slowly, carefully, every nerve screaming at me to run. I didn't make a sound. I fumbled for my phone, trying to unlock it with shaking hands, my eyes darting around the hallway. As I retreated towards my room, I passed the linen closet. The door was ajar, just a sliver, but enough for me to see inside. And then I saw it. A clean, folded blanket, one we kept for guests, was gone from the shelf. And below where it usually sat, neatly stacked, were two of our missing blue ceramic mugs, now upside down, resting on the floor of the closet. Someone had been living in our house, quietly, for days. I didn't scream, couldn't. I locked myself in my room, fumbling with the latch, and called 911. The dispatcher kept asking me to confirm what I was seeing, what I was hearing, but I just kept repeating, "Someone is in my house. Someone is living in my house." The police arrived quickly. They swept the house, room by room, but found nothing. No forced entry, no signs of anyone. The closet was empty, the mugs gone, the blanket gone. They told me they'd increase patrols, but there was nothing to report. I knew what I'd seen. I knew the subtle shifts, the missing things, the soft footstep. They were real. And now, sometimes when I'm home alone, I still feel that cold chill, that sense of being watched, as if our unseen guest is just waiting for us to forget again. These aren't tales of grand monsters or fantastical evils. They're about the quiet dread, the slow crawl of unease that settles when the familiar becomes foreign, and the safe spaces we inhabit suddenly feel exposed. They remind us that true horror often lies not in what we see, but in what we suspect, in the creeping suspicion that some lines have been crossed, some boundaries breached. These are the stories that stay with you long after the lights come back on, prompting you to double-check the lock, to glance over your shoulder. For more stories that linger, join us by subscribing for a new one every week.